So today we will learn the mechanism of opening and closing of the stomata. But before we learn this, let us revise osmosis. Is a topic you learned last year. So here we have a cell, and in this cell, the cell has a high concentration of sugar. Okay, there's a high concentration of sugar, and outside the cell we have this water. The cell is immersed in water. Now what do you expect to happen? Since the concentration of water outside is more than inside the cell, inside there is very less water. The water from outside will start entering into the cell. Okay, now since the water now keeps entering the cell, the water enters the cell. So what do you expect the cell, the size of the cell? The cell now swells. So we have now a much larger cell with sugar, of course, and a lot of water inside, and hence the cell swells. This is the reason why a cell will swell. We take another case where here is a cell where the concentration of sugar is low. There's a low concentration of sugar. A low concentration of sugar means there's a high concentration of water inside the cell. There is a lot of water in the cell. So in this case, what do you expect to happen to the cell? Since the concentration of water is high, now the concentration of water is very high, so you expect the water to leave the cell. So the water leaves the cell, as we have seen, since it's high concentration, and the cell is now going to shrink, to get smaller in size with the sugar in. Okay, so we'll just summarize what we have learned. Here we had the cell, and this cell had a high concentration of sugar, and because it had a high concentration of sugar, the water from the outside entered into the cell, and as the water entered into the cell, so here the water enters into the cell, the cell swells, and here the cell is much larger than the earlier case. In the second case, here again we have the cell, but in this case it's just the opposite. The concentration of sugar inside the cell is very low. There's a low concentration of sugar, but there is a high concentration of water. The water concentration is high. So what do you expect to happen? The water is going to leave the cell. And because this water leaves the cell is going to shrink. So the cell gets smaller, it shrinks. This principle we will use to explain the opening and closing of the stomata. We know that the stomata opens during the day and it closes during the night. So we now learn the structure of a stomata. We now learn the structure of a stomata. So here is a picture of the stomata. We first must know where are the stomata present. Number one, we know they are present in the lower epidermis of the leaf. The stomata are guarded by these kidney-shaped cells called the guard cells. You've seen they're all kidney-shaped. So the guard cells which surround the stomata are kidney-shaped. The center in between the guard cells is the stomatal opening. So we have the stomatal opening. Now the inner walls of the guard cells are thick, while the outer walls are thinner. While the outer wall are thinner, these outer walls are thin, and there's a reason for this. We will see later. The inner walls are thick and the outer walls are thin. Let's go over again on the structure of the stomata. This is a closed stomata, but the structure remains the same. They're present in the lower dermis of the leaf. It is guarded by these kidney-shaped cells. Here we have one kidney-shaped cell, and now we have another kidney-shaped cells. And in the center is the stomata. Now the stomata is closed. The walls we have seen. The inner wall is very thick of the stomata. That's it, the inner wall is thick, while the outer wall is thinner. This outer wall is much thinner. It has a nucleus, yeah, the nucleus. This also has a nucleus, and most important, it has got chloroplasts. Like all other cells of the plant, this also has the chloroplasts here. So we need to know 3 points in the structure of the guard cells and the stomata. Present in the lower dermis, they are kidney-shaped cells. Their inner wall is thick, outer wall is thin. They have a nucleus and a chloroplast. Now we go into the mechanism of opening and closing of the stomata. So here I've drawn a stomata, which is one cell. Drawn the guard cell, which is kidney shaped, and I told you the important part was this wall is very thick while the other is very thin. Here is this outer wall is very thin. This guard cell has got a nucleus, which, and like, yeah, that's the nucleus, and like all the other plant cells, it has got the chloroplast matter, which plays a very important function. During the day you have the sunlight, and because of the sunlight it performs photosynthesis. Now because of this photosynthesis, the chloroplast performs the photosynthesis, and now we get the sugar. So during the day the sugar concentration inside the cell is very high. So what do you expect? As we seen earlier, we'll expect the water which is surrounding this cell, the water surrounding the cell will start entering into the cell. The cell will now swell, and because it will swell, this will stretch open and the stomata will open. During night, the photosynthesis stops So during the night, the photosynthesis stops, which means the sugar content, there is no more sugar produced inside the cell. So the sugar content begins to lessen, becomes low. The sugar is used up, so there is less sugar. And now if there is less sugar, the water which is inside the cell will start now leaving the cell. There is less sugar, so the water will leave the cell. And if this water leaves the cell, the guard cells will shrink and they will back again collapse. This will close down and will back again get a closed stomata. So let's go over it again. During the day, we have the stomata, we have the chloroplast, and this chloroplast produce sugar. So there is high amount of sugar, and because there is high amount of sugar, the water now enters into the cell. And because the water enters into the cell swells. During the night, there is no photosynthesis. Photosynthesis stops. So the cell has no sugar. There is only water inside. There is no sugar. There is less sugar. So the amount of water in the cell is more. So now the water begins to leave the cell and the cell shrinks. So we summarize it once again. During the day, there is photosynthesis, and because there is photosynthesis, the sugar level increases, and because the sugar level increases, water enters into the cell swells and the stomata opens. During the night, there is no photosynthesis. The sugar level now decreases. The water leaves the cell shrinks and the stomata closes. So the opening and the closing of stomata is mainly controlled by the entry and exit of water into and out of the guard cells.